The frigid fall morning of 2024 in the small town of Thermopolis, Wyoming, began with a strange disturbance. 4 Wyoming DCI SUVs quietly pulled up in front of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, a building that hadn't seen a mobilization of this scale in years. Early commuters glanced through their windows, wondering why agents in bulletproof vests were gathering outside a place usually only handling ice-related car wrecks and livestock disputes. Inside, Detective Sloan Hawthorne was laying out photographs that had been sealed for over a decade. The child's shoe found beneath Boysen Reservoir, the 3 bodies wedged in a rock crevice, and finally, the image of the Audi Q7 pulled from Bull Lake Creek after 14 years missing. At 7:12, the conference room alarm chimed. "Everyone take your seats," Hawthorne said, his voice low but firm. "Today we're reopening case in Taunton." Agents later recalled that his hand tightened slightly when he touched the final photo, a blurry selfie of a Maris Villa, taken seconds before the moment that changed the fate of Leah Terrell and her 3 children. Hawthorne's face remained strangely calm, as if he had been waiting a very long time to finally break 14 years of silence. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys to uncover forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Winter to Thermopolis, Wyoming was swallowed by skin-cutting wind and a persistent fog rolling down from the Owl Creek Mountains. Pine trees along the highway shuddered in waves as gusts swept through, signaling an approaching blizzard. In the dim twilight, Leah Terrell's old sedan, a 29-year-old mother, left town with her 3 children, Rowan, 8, Mira, 5 and Asher, 4. The drive to Riverton was routine, but the worsening weather made the trip colder and more uncertain than ever. Before reaching the Boysen Dam area, Leah stopped at a small rest stop to check luggage and make sure the kids were warm enough. That was the last time anyone saw the 4 of them. A yellow light spilled from the convenience store, reflecting off the sedan parked on the shoulder. Leah checked a paper map, closed the trunk, buckled the kids in, and started the engine. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a family continuing their journey. Nothing foretold what was about to happen. As the sedan entered Wind River Canyon, the sky slammed shut faster than expected. The blizzard began dumping wave after wave of snow, turning the highway into a white blur. The narrow curves between rock walls, hundreds of meters high, became more treacherous than ever. Crosswinds erased tire tracks within minutes. In that frozen void, the sedan's headlights were the only point of light, then gradually swallowed by darkness and snow. Leah's family waited for her in Riverton as planned, but hours passed with no word. The first calls still rang, then the phone went completely dead. Every minute of silence heightened the worry. They knew this wasn't like Leah, especially with the 3 kids in the car. When late night turned into early morning, with still no sign of the 4, unease turned into real fear. Relatives immediately contacted the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office, reporting that Leah Terrell's car and her entire family had vanished on the stretch through Wind River Canyon. A place every local knows. Once darkness and snow take something, getting it back is never easy. When the missing person call for Leah Terrell's family came into dispatch, the on-duty officer at the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office instantly straightened in his chair, jotting down every detail. The caller said Leah was driving through Wind River Canyon in a blizzard with her 3 children and had been unreachable for hours. From the very first moment, the caller's voice shook with worry, and that alone told the officer this wasn't a routine temporarily lost winter report. After confirming names, vehicle direction and last contact time, he immediately notified the night patrol commander and activated emergency search protocol. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 patrol units and 1 Wyoming Highway Patrol vehicle rolled out, heading toward the entrance of Wind River Canyon, a road already dangerous in summer, let alone tonight with a strengthening blizzard. When the search team arrived, they faced their first challenge: fresh snow so thick that not a single tire track remained on the highway, despite regular traffic. Headlights sweeping the pavement revealed nothing. It was completely clean, making it nearly impossible to guess which way the sedan had gone. The first thing the team did was crawl along the route, examining every meter for signs of a crash. The results were 0. No skid mark, no slide marks, no broken glass or plastic fragments, no indication the car had ever left the roadway. For a suspected traffic accident, finding zero physical evidence was extremely unusual, especially on a high-risk stretch like Wind River Canyon. The team documented everything with body cams and ran a second slower pass, focusing on sharp curves and cliff edges, the places vehicles most often lose control. The wind grew stronger, whipping snow across windshields, forcing additional units from Thermopolis to be called in. A search helicopter was deployed, but high gusts forced the pilot to fly higher than optimal, reducing thermal imaging effectiveness to almost nothing. The thermal screen showed only random black patches. Steam rising from the Wind River combined with falling snow scrambled every signal. No engine heat, no signs of human body heat. On the ground, teams checked old or eroded guardrail sections, but everything was intact. If Leah's car had gone off the road, it most likely slid at a spot without railings. But with snow that deep, no one could say for sure whether that had even happened. As the clock neared dawn, the search commander called a quick roadside briefing under the glow of patrol lights reflecting off blinding white snow. They reviewed possibilities. The family might have turned off onto a different route before entering the canyon. The car could be completely buried under snow, or it fell into a spot too deep to see during a nighttime blizzard. None were prioritized, but all three were logged to expand the search area the next day. The teams returned to base carrying confusion and concern. The road had swallowed the car without leaving a single clue to follow. That was when they realized this disappearance would not be like anything they'd handled before. The first morning of the search operation began with a heavy atmosphere as the entire investigation team had to confront what happened overnight. A highway with no tire tracks, no debris, no sign the sedan had ever passed through. This forced a new approach, re-examining the entire terrain of Wind River Canyon, to identify places where a vehicle could vanish without a trace. Geological maps were spread across the hood of a patrol truck, along with slope maps and terrain simulations provided by the Wyoming Geological Survey. Wind River Canyon isn't just a road cut through mountains, it's a narrow strip squeezed between sheer rock walls where layers of earth are constantly eroded by seasons, and many sections drop steeply enough to swallow a vehicle in an instant. These features meant the search had to rely more on terrain analysis than physical evidence. The team began marking high-risk points, sharp curves without guardrails, eroded shoulders, spots where pavement is only a few meters from a drop-off, and areas previously reported as prone to sliding after rain or melt. Each location was logged as a point of interest, places where, if the sedan left the road, the initial night patrol might have seen nothing in blizzard conditions. A specialized team moved point to point. At each site they examined the road edge, snow surface, color changes in ice, or any odd markings on the rock faces below. Still, everything was seamless, no slide marks, no displaced dirt or rock, no snapped saplings. The usual signs of a vehicle leaving the roadway. Snow had covered everything, erasing clues, making every suspect spot look identical, pure white and silent. Unable to rely on the roadway, searchers expanded downward into the canyon. Steep slopes beside the Wind River were accessed via rope. From lower vantage points they tried to peer into blind spots, invisible from above. Large riverside boulders, drifting ice flows, deep rock crevices, all were thoroughly checked. Yet there was no sign of a crashed vehicle. Not a single piece of body panel, paint scrape, rubber mark or glass shard. Another team extended the search along the river itself, in case the car plunged into the water and was carried downstream. But winter river water was thick and murky from the storm. Sonar couldn't produce clear results. Suspected spots were simply marked for later, more advanced equipment once weather cleared. The search radius continued expanding miles in both directions, covering every possible route Leah might have taken before disappearing. Patrol units were split to sweep every minor turnoff, side road and little-known pullout. The results repeated like a baffling pattern, not one trace of Leah's silver sedan. By the end of the expanded search day, the evidence board still read blank under vehicle indicator. Investigators began facing a reality colder than the blizzard still raging through the canyon. There was zero proof of what happened to that car, even though it was the only vehicle Leah could have been driving that night. Every theory lacked foundation, and the canyon kept its secret like a silent abyss, concealing far more than it revealed. The expanded search efforts across the Wind River Canyon terrain still yielded no significant progress, and with no traces found either on the roadway or below the cliff, the investigation team was forced to rely on time in hopes of new clues emerging. Weeks passed, winter gradually ended, and the flow of the Wind River grew stronger due to melting snow from the mountains to the north. It was this very change that opened up a different approach the search team had been unable to fully exploit in the early days. The current could have carried away anything swept from the scene if there even was a scene. Several months after the disappearance, as the ice on Boysen Reservoir began to thaw, a state park water quality technician accidentally discovered a small object lodged among tree branches along the shore. It was a child's shoe, a lightweight canvas sneaker with a sole darkened by prolonged exposure to water. The stains on its surface indicated the item had been drifting in the current for a considerable time before washing ashore. The information was immediately forwarded to the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office, and the shoe was quickly transferred to the Wyoming DCI Forensic Lab. Analysis confirmed it belonged to 5-year-old Mira Pembroke, the little girl who vanished along with her mother and siblings while traveling through the canyon. Though small, this discovery was the first piece of direct physical evidence linked to Leah's family since the night of the incident. After hundreds of search hours that turned up not a single fragment of the sedan or any personal belongings, a child's shoe drifting into the reservoir was worth more than any prior lead. With the first piece of physical evidence in hand, hydrologists were brought in to assist. Boysen Reservoir lies downstream from Wind River Canyon, meaning any lightweight object that entered the water inside the canyon had a high probability of drifting with the current to the reservoir within weeks or months, depending on wind and flow conditions. The experts mapped seasonal current patterns and calculated potential drift paths from the time Leah's family disappeared until the shoe appeared. The hydrological analysis indicated that a small object like a child's shoe could have been swept from a location in the northern section of the canyon, carried through the narrow stretches and out the canyon mouth, before being pushed into the Boysen water. This strengthened the possibility that Leah's sedan had gone off the road and been taken by the river system, a theory considered early on but lacking evidence to confirm. The shoe's discovery forced investigators to readjust the search area. Instead of focusing solely on potential fall points along the highway edge, they expanded the zone to include the entire river channel, whirlpools and rock ledges below the canyon where heavier objects might snag before being carried farther downstream. A new search map was created, marking locations where the current was most likely to retain a vehicle body or other family belongings. Underwater search teams were mobilized again, this time equipped with specialized side-scan sonar equipment that couldn't be deployed during blizzard conditions, but became viable as water levels stabilized. They systematically scanned areas where currents could push objects in and trap them due to underwater topography. Yet despite scanning every square meter of riverbed with sonar, no returns indicated the presence of a vehicle. Although the results didn't produce a breakthrough, the shoe remained the first concrete proof that Leah's family had left the roadway before vanishing completely. While insufficient to pinpoint the exact plunge point or cause, it eliminated earlier theories such as taking a wrong turn or stopping elsewhere. The shoe confirmed their final stretch of road ended inside or immediately adjacent to the canyon, at a location investigators still couldn't identify. Based on the hydrologist's conclusions and the recovered item, the primary search zone was officially redefined. Dozens of miles of river channel were prioritized, with heavy focus on sections featuring treacherous terrain, unusual depth, and strong eddy current. Yet even with the expanded search area, the most critical questions remained unanswered. Why was there no trace whatsoever of the car, and where was that 1-ton sedan beneath the thousands of cubic meters of water and rock in Wind River Canyon? Those questions lingered, signaling that the search was far from over. The Wind River's flow changed with the seasons, sometimes raging high, sometimes receding to expose jagged riverbed no one could access in winter. Investigators knew that finding any remaining evidence required waiting for nature to reveal what had been hidden inside the canyon. And that moment finally arrived, but with a sight no one on the team wanted to face. 2 years after the disappearance, Boysen Reservoir entered its most severe low water period due to below-average rainfall and slower snowmelt in the northern mountains. As the water level dropped dramatically, areas once buried under fast-moving currents, exposed rock pockets, crevices and strips of land the search teams had never been able to reach. During a routine patrol, a Wyoming Game and Fish employee spotted an oddly shaped object wedged in a rock crevice right at the water's edge, something he initially thought was just discarded clothing. Upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't fabric but human bones with remnants still attached. Notification went immediately to Wyoming DCI and the medical examiner's office. Within hours the site was secured, and investigators and forensic technicians arrived to conduct a careful recovery. As layers of sediment, rock and algae were removed bit by bit, 2 additional bodies appeared beside the first, all trapped in a narrow water-carved rock slot. Preliminary identification was made on scene based on body size and remaining clothing fragments. The 3 bodies belonged to Leah Terrell, Rowan Pembroke, and Mira Pembroke. Despite 2 years in the water, their position and condition allowed forensic experts to make initial determinations. All 3 had been ejected from the vehicle with considerable force before the current carried them to the crevice. Their body positions and distances from one another indicated they did not die in the slot, but were pushed there after leaving the vehicle. One crucial detail, however, made the scene even more mysterious. There was no sign of baby Asher, no clothing fragment, no body part, no direct evidence he had ever been at that location. His absence raised an immediate and grave question. Had Asher been carried farther downstream, caught elsewhere, or had something else happened to the youngest child? After the 3 bodies were removed from the crevice, the forensic team surveyed the entire surrounding area for additional evidence. Side channels, lower rock ledges and bowl-shaped features capable of trapping heavy objects were marked and examined. Still, uneven water withdrawal left many zones too deep or hazardous to access. All hope now rested on autopsy results and more detailed current modeling to pinpoint the vehicle's plunge site, because only finding the sedan would allow investigators to piece the full story together. Discovering the 3 bodies marked a major step forward in the case, and significantly narrowed theories about the cause of the disappearance. Initial scene findings suggested the incident was not a simple case of the car sliding off the road. Rather, it likely involved a violent impact strong enough to eject all occupants almost instantly. But everything remained hypothetical. Determining what actually happened required more data, especially from the autopsy. Though the heartbreaking scene at the crevice partially answered what became of Leah and 2 of her children, the mystery of why the car went off the road and Asher's complete disappearance remained intact. And it was precisely those mysteries that propelled the investigation into its next phase, one where the bodies themselves would have to speak for what had been unseen for 2 long years. The remains recovered from the Boysen Reservoir crevice were promptly transferred to the Wyoming DCI Forensic Laboratory, where the 3 bodies were placed in special preservation conditions to begin autopsy procedures. Positive identification was straightforward, thanks to clothing, bone size, and remaining anthropometric features, but the critical question investigators needed answered was what caused the deaths of Leah, Rowan, and Mira, and why their bodies were ejected from the vehicle before being swept downstream. Every theory hinged on the autopsy results, the first step toward understanding the mechanics of the tragedy. Throughout the forensic examinations, experts focused on bone condition, particularly long bones and ribcage structure, which typically reflect the type of force sustained before death. All 3 victims showed remarkably consistent injuries: symmetrical bilateral rib fractures, transverse femur fractures, and multiple breaks in the spine and shoulders. These were not the fracture patterns seen when a vehicle loses control and freefalls off a cliff. Instead, the fracture characteristics indicated a powerful force striking the occupants from behind before the vehicle left the roadway. In typical single-vehicle accidents, especially off-road plunges, most trauma is frontal or lateral due to head-on impact or spinning. However, in these 3 bodies, the impact signatures came from neither the front nor the sides, and did not match freefall. The injury pattern suggested an extremely strong forward propelling force acting on all occupants simultaneously, the kind typically seen in high-speed rear-end collision. Closer examination of crack patterns in ribs and vertebrae revealed nearly identical fracture lines among Leah and the 2 girls. These lines form when the body experiences rapid rearward to forward acceleration. Additionally, remaining soft tissue showed signs of sudden acceleration immediately prior to death, common when a vehicle is struck and pushed forward in an instant. Taken together, the evidence supported a striking hypothesis: Leah's sedan was likely struck from behind by another vehicle. Another detail that caught the pathologist's attention was the distribution of skull trauma across all 3 victims. Injuries were not concentrated on the forehead, as would be expected in a frontal crash into an obstacle, but rather in areas consistent with uncontrolled forward propulsion. This also aligned with them being thrown clear of the vehicle before the current took over. While the exact moment of ejection couldn't be determined, the injury severity indicated an extraordinarily violent and instantaneous impact. Based on all collected data, the forensic team issued preliminary conclusions. The 3 victims did not die because the car simply slid off the road. The most likely scenario was a rear impact collision that sent the sedan off the roadway and into the canyon. This conclusion completely shifted the investigation's direction, because a single vehicle accident alone could not produce this injury pattern without some extraordinary factor. It simultaneously raised a far bigger question: what other vehicle was on that stretch of road during a blizzard night, and how did it disappear without a trace for 2 years? While pathologists continued analyzing final tissue samples to strengthen the report, investigators fully recognized that while the car almost certainly went off the road, the reason it did so did not originate with the driver. Asher's continued absence further complicated reconstruction, as there was no way to know whether he sustained similar injuries or was carried much farther downstream. The autopsy results narrowed the range of plausible scenarios to the clearest point since the case began. This was not a simple accident. There was a high probability a second, larger, heavier or faster-moving vehicle struck Leah's car from behind before the sedan vanished from the roadway. Although nothing could yet be proven conclusively, the forensic report provided a new investigative path: locate traces of that second vehicle, if it still exists somewhere in the canyon's rugged terrain or was swept away like the sedan. Investigators have yet to find. And that path became the foundation for the next phase of the investigation. A phase that uncovered more mysteries than answers. The forensic conclusion that the force impacting the victims came from behind forced the investigation team to pivot to a new task: determining whether a second vehicle had ever appeared on the stretch of road through Wind River Canyon on the night Leah and her 3 children vanished. This was not simple. The collision occurred in the middle of a blizzard, there were virtually no witnesses, and every trace on the roadway had been wiped clean within just a few hours afterward. However, if a vehicle had struck with enough force to eject all 4 occupants from the passenger compartment, that vehicle itself would have sustained significant damage, and that became the starting point. The team began by canvassing every auto repair shop within a radius of dozens of miles around Thermopolis, Shoshone, Riverton, and the small towns along Highway 20. In serious accidents, perpetrators often take the vehicle to an out-of-the-way shop or a small facility off the main highway. A list of more than 100 garages was quickly compiled, and investigators were divided into teams to visit each one in person, ask questions, and cross-check repair records. The search criteria focused on SUVs or heavy-duty trucks, showing front-end repairs, especially abrasion marks, replaced front bumpers, replaced windshields, or replaced radiators. Damage typical after a high-speed collision. However, most shop owners said they didn't recall repairing any unusually damaged vehicle from 2 years earlier. The more careful ones pulled their old records, but nothing suspicious turned up. The search didn't stop at local garages. The team expanded to larger repair facilities in Casper, Lander, Cody, and even Jackson, looking for records from 1 to 3 weeks after the disappearance that might reveal a damaged vehicle whose owner never reported an accident. Approaching these shops still yielded no vehicle that matched the strong rear impact scenario described by forensics. Investigators noted this in their reports with puzzlement. There was no sign that a crash vehicle had been secretly repaired anywhere. Parallel to the garage checks, the team queried Wyoming DMV records, and those of neighboring states, Colorado, Montana, and Idaho. The goal was to find vehicles that had changed plates, been sold in a hurry, or been reported stolen during the same window. A driver wanting to hide a serious collision might try to erase evidence by swapping the engine, selling the vehicle out of state, or reporting it stolen. Yet after reviewing hundreds of records, no vehicle matched the profile the team needed. These efforts quickly turned into a dead-end loop. Every garage gave the same answer. Every DMV file was ruled out for timing. Every lead hit a wall. A vehicle that struck hard enough to cause that kind of damage should have shown obvious repair signs, yet in reality, no vehicle in the region bore evidence of a major collision. This forced the team to consider 2 possibilities. The crash vehicle left Wyoming the same night, or the vehicle disappeared the same way Leah's sedan did, went over the edge into the canyon and was swept away by the river. The second possibility, though extreme, could not be ruled out immediately. The flow of the Wind River is capable of carrying a vehicle downstream into deep water, especially given the constantly shifting slopes of Boysen Reservoir in winter and early spring. If that had happened, the only remaining trace of the offending vehicle might now lie under mud, rock, and cold water right alongside the sedan the team still hadn't found. By the end of the garage and DMV canvas phase, the investigation team reached a vague but chilling conclusion. No vehicle still on the surface matched the profile of a perpetrator. And if that vehicle never appeared at any shop, was never repaired anywhere, never changed plates, and never showed up in DMV data, only one possibility remained. The colliding vehicle had not been on the surface for a very long time. That was the moment the team realized the answer might not lie on the road, or in any garage, but beneath deep water, in the dark reaches of the canyon they still couldn't access. The results from the garage canvas and DMV checks forced the team to face an unacceptable reality. There was no evidence any vehicle had caused a collision at the time Leah's family disappeared. Combined with the continued absence of Leah's sedan, the case had fallen into the state every investigator dreads: total absence of physical traces. With neither the offending vehicle nor the victim's car, the entire chain of reasoning about the collision mechanism lacked the foundation needed to reconstruct it accurately. The deadlock grew worse when the team re-examined all search data from the past 2 years. No tire tracks, no debris on the roadway, no skid marks at the edge, and no resident reported seeing even a momentary crash. Wind River Canyon that night seemed to swallow everything. The sedan, the suspected second vehicle, and every sign of impact. This was completely unlike most traffic accidents authorities handle, where even a tiny shard of glass or a light skid mark can become the key to a breakthrough. The lack of witnesses made progress even harder. Everyone who traveled that road that night agreed on one thing. The blizzard was so fierce, you couldn't see an oncoming vehicle, even at close range. That made sense of why no one heard a major impact, even though the force had to be strong enough to eject all passengers. Howling wind, thunder, and the roar of the river could easily mask the sound of a collision, leaving it completely unnoticed. With no victim vehicle, no suspect vehicle, and no witnesses, scene reconstruction, the cornerstone of any crash investigation, became impossible. They couldn't measure deflection angles, couldn't determine the start of a skid, couldn't infer speed from debris patterns, couldn't analyze tire position relative to the road surface. All standard investigative methods were rendered useless for lack of physical data to analyze. The scene map was filled with notes reading no traces, no debris, no skid marks, a blank white space in a case that needed the smallest details to piece together. After reanalyzing every avenue and confirming no reasonable leads remained at the time, the team had to report that the case had reached a deadlock, not due to lack of effort or manpower, but because the canyon and river had erased every trace exactly the way nature often hides an accident or something even harder to explain. In the end, once the final reports of the initial investigation phase were completed, authorities had no choice but to suspend the active investigation. Everyone understood this did not mean giving up, but it marked a deep low point in the disappearance, a point from which there was no new data to analyze, no further clues to follow, and no way to reconstruct what happened on that freezing stretch of road. And like many difficult cases before it, when every search avenue was exhausted, the file on Leah Terrell's family moved one step closer to the outcome. No investigator wants to write conversion to cold case status, where only time and chance, if they ever come, can reopen a path buried for years. The deadlock reports from the initial investigation phase were sent to state level, and based on what had been gathered, or more accurately, what could not be gathered, the disappearance of Leah Terrell's family was handed over to the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation (DCI) for full reevaluation. This is the standard step when a case appears to exceed the analytical capacity of county-level agencies, especially incidents tied to complex terrain and missing data like the one in Wind River Canyon. Once the file reached Cheyenne, Wyoming DCI investigators compiled every piece of evidence, forensic reports, search documentation, and scene notes from the first 2 years. Everything was pulled together into one long analysis, including photos of snow-covered scene, river flow maps, autopsy conclusions about rear impact force, and reports confirming zero physical traces along the highway. The entire file shared one clear trait: Every clue led nowhere. DCI then faced the central question of this phase: could the sequence of events be reconstructed without Leah's sedan, without a suspect vehicle, and without witnesses? Experts were brought in to evaluate three approaches: terrain reconstruction, vehicle trajectory reconstruction, and collision scenario reconstruction based on victim injury. All three approaches hit the same wall: absence of direct physical data from the scene, especially the missing victim vehicle. In terrain reconstruction, geologists pointed out that Wind River Canyon has too many unquantifiable variables: dramatically shifting slopes, inaccessible rock crevices, and currents strong enough to move objects weighing hundreds of pounds within days. Although slope maps showed several plausible drop-off points, no traces existed at those locations to confirm anything. This made identifying the fall point nearly impossible with the required precision. In vehicle trajectory reconstruction, crash experts faced an even bigger problem. They couldn't calculate speed, impact angle, or directional force without data from the car bodies. Although victim injuries suggested a rear collision, no vehicle on the surface showed the expected damage pattern. No car body, no fragments, no velocity data, no road skid marks. Everything turned the reconstruction model into an equation with too many unknowns. Biomechanical injury analysis also couldn't go beyond what forensics had already stated. The victim's injuries clearly showed major force, but the size or speed of the striking vehicle could not be determined. With no scene data to collect, the expert's conclusion could only go as far as rear impact definitely occurred, but the source of that force remains unidentified. All these limitations led to the unified conclusion at DCI's summary meeting. Current conditions were insufficient to continue a traditional investigation, and full event reconstruction was impossible without new evidence. At that the difficult decision had to be made. File Den Tin 21476, the disappearance and deaths of Leah Terrell's family was deemed unable to progress further without fresh tips from the public, nature, or random chance. After completing the final evaluation report, Wyoming DCI officially classified the case as a cold case, a category of unsolved cases retained indefinitely in hopes that one day they can be reopened. Classifying it as a cold case did not mean the investigation was abandoned. It simply acknowledged a truth every investigator knows: the canyon and river erased too much. No data, no vehicles, no witnesses, only 3 bodies washed into rock crevices and 1 missing child remained. The rest of the story lies buried under layers of rock, mud, and cold water, waiting for some future event to bring it back to light. When case file Den Tin 21476 was officially moved to the cold case list and placed in the Wyoming DCI archives, no one expected that a story everyone thought had been buried by time would be awakened by an event completely unrelated to any criminal investigation. 14 years after the disappearance, a geological survey team working on a project to study water flow and subsurface rock structures around Bull Lake Creek began deploying magnetometer equipment for geological assessment. Their original goal was simply to map underwater sediment, but during the data sweep a large abnormal metal signal appeared on the screen. An object roughly the shape of a motor vehicle buried deep beneath layers of mud and rock. The signal was so strong that the survey team halted the entire scan to re-verify it with backup equipment. When the second result was identical, the team leader decided to report it to the State Park Service, and the information was subsequently forwarded to Wyoming DCI, because a metal object of that size in this area was rarely something that could be ignored. DCI quickly dispatched a technical team to the scene with a specialized underwater ROV, remotely operated vehicle. Bull Lake Creek is known for its complex bottom terrain with many deep rock crevices, making access require precise control skill. The ROV was lowered to the metal signal location, powerful LED lights cut through the murky water, and the first outlines of the object on the bottom gradually emerged. A wide metal structure, curved roof, and overall shape immediately told the technical team this was not a piece of machinery or industrial equipment. It was a full-size SUV wedged between 2 boulders at a depth difficult to reach. The ROV circled the vehicle, a thin layer of mud covered the peeling paint, and when the camera focused on the rear, the light reflected back a faded but still recognizable logo. The robot then moved in for closer images of the rear area where license plates or secondary VIN frames are usually located. Although the plate itself was gone, the technicians were able to capture a clear photo of the VIN etched into the steel frame near the rear suspension. This detail was critical to identifying the vehicle. Within minutes of the VIN being run through headquarters, the DMV database returned the result. Black Audi Q7. Registered in Denver. Owner Amaris Vela, age 33 at the time of registration. That name caused Wyoming DCI leadership to immediately pull the old file. Amaris Vela had never appeared anywhere in the 2010 investigation, was not a Wyoming resident, and was not within the travel radius of the Leah family. Yet the fact that a Denver woman's Audi Q7 had been lying on the bottom of Bull Lake Creek, undetected for over a decade, was information that could not be ignored. The ROV continued recording from the front of the vehicle, and the damage to the Audi Q7's nose immediately drew attention. Deeply crumpled metal, a fracture line running across the front bumper, completely shattered windshield, and headlight assemblies crushed inward, as though they had taken a massive impact. This was not the kind of damage caused by time or underwater rock pressure. It was the signature of a high-speed collision. The initial report noted that the vehicle's trapped position lay directly along the downstream flow path from Wind River Canyon into Bull Lake Creek. The exact water axis that hydrologists had previously concluded could have carried Leah's sedan away, and this opened a possibility the original investigation never had data to consider. Not only the Leah family sedan disappeared into the current, but another vehicle had been swept in the same direction at the same time. The discovery of Amaris Vela's long-submerged Audi Q7 became the biggest single piece of the puzzle the case had received since the three bodies were found. It was enough for the investigative team to formally reopen file Jum 10-2476, and for the first time in 14 frozen years, the disappearance of the Leah Terrell family finally had a new direction. The discovery of the Audi Q7 on the bottom of Bull Lake Creek immediately prompted Wyoming DCI to recover the vehicle to the Forensic Center in Cheyenne. The SUV was heavily deformed, but the chassis and cabin were intact enough to offer hope of finding something more valuable than any witness. The ECM, the vehicle's black box, which stores operating data from the final seconds before impact. After the Audi's mysterious 14-year disappearance, the ECM became the only key capable of revealing what human memory could no longer recall or had chosen to hide. Recovering the ECM was far from simple. Water, mud and time had corroded many of the internal circuits. DCI enlisted the help of Dr. Maren Silvers, the region's top expert in electronic control unit analysis from traffic accidents. She is known in forensic circles for her ability to recover data thought completely lost forever to water or fire. Upon examining the Audi's black box, Dr. Silvers estimated that at least 60% of the data was likely damaged, but the core area recording speed, steering angle, throttle and brake had a good chance of recovery if handled correctly. The restoration process took many days in a dedicated lab. Layers of mud were chemically removed, then the ECM was dried in a vacuum chamber to prevent further damage. Usable circuits were scanned with low-power readers, and each byte of data was extracted and reassembled like an electronic mosaic. Dr. Silvers and her technicians ran 3 different recovery programs simultaneously to ensure the data matched and to rule out noise-induced errors. When the first readable data appeared on the screen, the lab fell silent. The display clearly showed vehicle speed 68 miles, with no braking whatsoever in the final seconds, a state equivalent to an uncontrolled plunge. Additional crash memory entries showed freely spinning wheels, no electronic stability control activation, and no engine throttling response. These readings proved the driver made no attempt to steer away or slow down before impact, completely contrary to normal human survival reflex. The biggest surprise was the timestamp, the exact moment the ECM recorded the crash event. When Dr. Silvers cross-referenced it with the time the Leah family lost contact, the numbers matched perfectly. Not off by minutes or hours, but nearly to the minute, the same window when Leah's sedan was believed to have entered the no-signal zone inside the canyon. For verification, the ECM data was combined with inertial motion simulation analysis. Acceleration and heading values confirmed the Audi was not only traveling fast, but heading south, directly into Wind River Canyon on the same theoretical route taken the night of the disappearance. 68-mile spectre and blizzard conditions far exceeded any safe limit, and when matched with the frontal crush pattern, investigators became certain the Audi suffered a violent collision immediately before being swept into the current. Silver's final report concluded, The vehicle was out of control prior to impact. The driver did not apply brakes at the critical moment. The collision occurred at high speed with massive force. The timestamp of the collision matches exactly the night the Leah Tyrrell family vanished. The Audi was physically present in the canyon at the time of the incident. With this data, Wyoming DCI for the first time possessed clear technical evidence that Amaris Vela's Audi Q7 was not only in the danger zone the night of the tragedy, but suffered a severe impact immediately before disappearing underwater. ECM parameters cannot be altered, cannot be denied, and do not rely on anyone's memory or statement. When the report reached the Cold Case Unit Commander, files on 10-2476 officially entered an entirely new phase. After 14 years lost in snow and water, the electronic data from the submerged Audi had opened the first window pointing directly at the person who once drove it. And from that moment, the name Amaris Vela was no longer a peripheral stranger in the file, but the central focus of the investigation. The ECM data confirming Amaris Vela's Audi Q7 was in Wind River Canyon at the exact moment the Leah Tyrrell family disappeared, marked a major turning point, but Wyoming DCI needed more to establish the driver's route and state of mind before the collision. While examining the recovered Audi's cabin, technicians discovered a seemingly insignificant item, a micro-SD memory card wedged between the seat and center armrest, encased in thick mud but with its plastic housing still intact. The card was rushed to the digital forensics lab. Under a microscope, the mud was carefully dissolved with specialized solution. Then the chip was read using a damaged media recovery adapter. Initially, most files were fragmented from long-term water exposure, but after 3 deep scans and reassembly, the team recovered several image folders, one named Denver Trip. Inside were dozens of selfies, landscape photos, and short front camera video clips, apparently synced from an older phone app. Many files were irretrievable, but roughly 1/3 of the data was restored, enough to produce another bombshell, a selfie taken by Amaris Vela minutes before the ECM recorded impact. The selfie file was fragmented into 3 pieces and had to be stitched together. When the complete image appeared, the lab went quiet. Amaris was in the driver's seat, facing the camera with classic duck lips, while behind her headlight glare reflected off heavy falling snow. Most critically, her eyes were on the road. She was looking directly at the phone, perfectly matching the ECM data showing 68 miles per hour with no brake application. The selfie was only half the story. What was visible in the reflections proved far more important. The forensic imaging team enlarged the windshield area behind Amaris's head, where road and cliff lights created a faint reflection. After noise reduction and contrast enhancement, they clearly identified the distinctive curved rock formation characteristic of the northern entrance to Wind River Canyon. The match was unmistakable, thin streaks of light curving downward at the exact angle of the canyon's eastern wall. Elongated snowflake reflections, everything confirmed Amaris was traveling the stretch from Thermopolis toward Shoshone, the same direction Leah took that night. Image analysts continued extracting reflections from the phone camera's curved lens, which despite distortion, revealed light sources behind the Audi. An oval cluster of light appeared, consistent with the taillight pattern of a compact sedan, the same class of vehicle Leah drove. Although resolution was too low for absolute confirmation, the presence of that light cluster strongly suggested Amaris was closing in on a sedan in the minutes before impact. Metadata from the restored selfie filled gaps the ECM could not. From partial GPS coordinates and embedded timestamps, even though degraded, digital forensics reconstructed the following route. Amaris left Denver heading north in the afternoon, passed through Fort Collins and Cheyenne, continued to Casper, then turned toward Thermopolis. Finally entered Wind River Canyon at the same time the Leah family was on that highway. Metadata after 14 years underwater was partially corrupted, but technicians recovered the single most critical detail. The selfie's timestamp matched the ECM crash timestamp, almost to the minute. This meant a sedan was very likely directly ahead of the Audi when the picture was taken. Exactly the position for a rear-end collision as described in the original forensic report. When every piece was combined, windshield reflections, photo metadata, the Colorado to Wyoming route, plus the speed and control state data from the ECM, Wyoming DCI, finally possessed, after 14 years, a continuous chain of events. Amaris Vela, drove her Audi Q7 into Wind River Canyon during blizzard conditions, used her phone to take a selfie immediately before the collision, and never braked in the final seconds. The investigation no longer revolved around the question, was she involved? It had shifted entirely to a far bigger one. What brought Amaris to Wyoming that night, and why did her Audi lie undetected on the bottom of Bull Lake Creek for 4 days? The data from the ECM and the recovered selfie not only revealed Amaris Vela's behavior right before the collision, but also forced Wyoming DCI to delve deeper into her driving habits. Whether the actions on the night of the incident were unusual or just a continuation of a pre-existing pattern of behavior. When the investigation team queried the Colorado DMV records, where Amaris lived and registered her Audi Q7, they quickly realized that what happened in Wind River Canyon in 2010 did not occur in a vacuum. Amaris had a history of reckless driving stretching back many years prior. The DMV records noted more than 40 violations in just the 3 years before the incident occurred. Most involved speeding, and not the mild excesses commonly seen on highways, but figures far exceeding the limits. 20-30 mph, 20-35 mph, even some exceeding 40 mph in populated areas. The tickets were issued scattered from Denver to Aurora and Littleton, showing that Amaris frequently drove at high speeds regardless of road type or traffic condition. In addition to the speeding history, many police reports also noted Amaris had been warned about using her phone while driving, including taking photos, recording videos, texting, and using social media apps. One particularly noteworthy report documented an incident the year before the disappearance. A patrol officer stopped Amaris's Audi Q7 on Interstate 25 after spotting her live streaming while driving at high speed. Though it only resulted in a warning that time, the detailed report highlighted her level of distraction and disregard for danger. When cross-referencing the violation records with the recovered data from the memory card and ECM, a clear pattern emerged. Using the phone while driving was a repeated behavior. Taking selfies while the vehicle was in motion was not a spontaneous action, but consistent with the series of prior violations. Driving at high speeds in all circumstances was characteristic, not an exception. Wyoming DCI also investigated information about Amaris Vela's lifestyle at that time. She was a beauty and fashion influencer, frequently posting images, videos, and live streams on social media platforms. People who had followed Amaris's accounts said she often posted videos from inside her car, sometimes while driving on highways. Some content still archived on the internet showed her boasting about her ability to drive fast, but still in control, a phrase repeated multiple times in her live streams. Some old friends who were interviewed said that Amaris was addicted to speed, always overly confident in her driving skill. They said she often ignored advice to slow down, and believed that traffic regulations only slowed down the movement of young, dynamic people. This overconfidence led the investigation team to start asking questions. Did Amaris realize she was driving in a snowstorm, or did she still think that high speed would help her overcome the conditions as she often described? Another detail that made the profile more concerning. The Audi Q7 was registered solely in Amaris's name, but maintenance records showed the vehicle had been taken in for front bumper replacements multiple times in the 2 years before. One of those was after a minor collision, but the others had no clear reasons recorded. Garage technicians that DCI located confirmed that Amaris had a tendency to explain vaguely, often just saying the car was scratched from hitting the curb. This raised the possibility that those prior collisions could also have been the result of reckless or risky driving. When Wyoming DCI compiled all the data, the speeding history, phone use violations, disregard for danger and driving, along with the repeated signs of damage to the front of the vehicle, they concluded that the incident in Wind River Canyon was not an unexpected accident, but the consequence of a chain of reckless behaviors spanning many years. And when combined with the selfie right before the collision, that pattern became too clear to deny. Amaris had been driving fast, distracted, and completely unaware of the level of danger in the situation. With this behavioral profile, DCI had sufficient grounds to shift the focus of the investigation entirely to Amaris Vela, not just as the owner of the Audi, but as the person directly responsible for the chain of actions leading to the next direction of the investigation no longer revolved around questions like where was the vehicle, or how did the collision happen, but around statements from those who had been around her, especially the one person who might know what Amaris did after that night. Corbin Hay, her ex-boyfriend. The information about Amaris Vela's driving records, combined with the ECM data and recovered selfie, made Wyoming DCI need to determine Amaris's mood, schedule, and explanations at the time of the incident. However, contacting her directly was nearly impossible since the initial records made no mention of any missing person report or communication from her. Instead, investigators turned to the one person who had a close relationship with Amaris during that time. Corbin Hayes, her ex-boyfriend from 2009 to 2000. He agreed to meet with Wyoming DCI after being informed that Amaris's Audi Q7, the vehicle he had seen her use daily, had been found under Bull Lake Creek. The reappearance of the vehicle after 14 years left Corbin unable to hide his shock, and when the interview began, he affirmed, "I didn't know something that horrific had happened, but I remember very clearly the night she came back." Corbin recounted the 2010 timeline clearly, in more detail than any investigator expected. According to him, Amaris told him she needed a drive to relieve stress, leaving Denver in the afternoon on the same day the Leah family disappeared, and planning to return that night. Long-distance drives were not unusual for Amaris. She had driven hundreds of miles multiple times just to film videos or take photos for social media. However, on that night when she returned, Corbin described Amaris's state as strange in a way I can't explain in words. According to Corbin, Amaris returned to the apartment around nearly 4 a.m. She walked into the house looking panicked, clothes wet, hair disheveled, and without her phone. When Corbin asked where she had been, Amaris only gave evasive answers, saying slippery road, car skidded, then immediately slammed the bathroom door. Corbin affirmed he heard her vomiting and the sound of running water continuously as if trying to wash something clean. The most unusual point Corbin remembered was that the Audi Q7 was no longer parked in the apartment lot. When asked where the car was, Amaris only replied, "Don't ask, don't go looking for it." But at the time, Corbin didn't think to report it to the police. He thought Amaris had a minor accident and left the car somewhere, since she had a history of speeding and had damaged the car a few times before. When investigators asked for an exact timeline, Corbin provided one that matched perfectly with the recovered ECM data. Amaris left Denver around 4 p.m. If driving along Interstate 25, then turning toward Casper, the route to Thermopolis takes from Thermopolis down to Wind River Canyon only takes 20-30 minutes, right when the ECM recorded the collision data. The return trip to Denver afterward took many hours, fitting with her returning around nearly dawn. This timeline was too matching to be considered a random coincidence. Investigators continued to ask Corbin about Amaris's attitude in the days after. He said she was in an unstable state, insomniac, often jolting awake at night as if someone was chasing her. Amaris even asked Corbin not to turn on Wyoming news, which he found strange but didn't understand the reason at the time. Just a few weeks later, she left Denver for a few days without notice, then returned looking more stable, almost deliberately hiding that the night had never happened. When asked why he was only providing information now, Corbin admitted he thought the incident was just a personal accident of Amaris's and not related to anyone else. The discovery of the Audi at the bottom of Bull Lake Creek made him connect all the strange details of that night, and for the first time he realized how serious the truth might be. Wyoming DCI immediately evaluated Corbin's testimony through 3 criteria: timeline match, completely consistent with ECM timestamps, and the journey from Colorado to Wyoming. Amaris's unusual mental state, consistent with loss of control, phone use while driving, and high-speed collision. The sudden disappearance of the Audi consistent with the vehicle falling off the road and being swept away by the current. This testimony helped Wyoming DCI connect the missing part in the case picture. Not only was there technical evidence showing Amaris was at the canyon, but there was also an indirect witness proving she returned to Denver in a state, indicating she had just gone through a serious event. After cross-referencing all the data, the investigation team concluded that Corbin Hayes had provided key evidence. Amaris Vela not only appeared in Wind River Canyon at the exact time, she returned with mental signs typical of someone who had just experienced a serious accident and was hiding something. The information from Corbin was the next big piece, helping Wyoming DCI get closer to determining the entire truth that had been buried underwater for 14 years. When investigator Sloan Hawthorne went to Denver, Amaris was 47 years old. Far from the image of the young influencer who appeared in the selfies, recovered from the memory card. However, right from the first moment of the interview, Hawthorne noticed one thing unchanged. Amaris was still skillful and controlled in her speech, as if she had prepared a script for any question. When informed that her Audi Q7 had been found under Bull Lake Creek after 14 years, Amaris immediately denied any involvement. She said the vehicle had been stolen from a parking lot near the apartment in 2010, and that she never understood why it disappeared. This denial matched the story she had told a few people in the years after, except for the detail that no theft report was filed with Denver PD, DMV, or the insurance company. Hawthorne placed 3 photos in front of Amaris, the Audi Q7 lying at the bottom of Bull Lake Creek. A selfie of Amaris herself, taken seconds before the ECM recorded the collision. A printout of the ECM black box data, showing 68 mph speed and maximum throttle. Amaris's first reaction was evasion. She said the selfie could have been edited by someone, the vehicle could have been driven by a thief, and the ECM can't be trusted because it had been underwater too long. Hawthorne didn't react, just gently asked Amaris to explain why the ECM timestamp and the selfie timestamp matched almost perfectly, and why the reflection on the windshield in the photo matched the terrain at the entrance to Wind River Canyon. Amaris leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest, a defensive posture that Hawthorne had seen many times in traffic cases involving concealment. She said she couldn't remember where she was that day, then said she might have been with friends, but couldn't provide specific names. When asked about the timeline leaving Denver, Amaris changed her answer 3 times, and each time it completely contradicted Corbin Hayes's testimony. Hawthorne continued by presenting the hydrologist report, proving that the current in Wind River Canyon at that time was strong enough to sweep both the sedan and the SUV into the deep waters of Bull Lake Creek. This made Amaris's story of car stolen and dumped in the creek no longer feasible. When faced with the hydrology data, Amaris pursed her lips for a few seconds, a reaction that Hawthorne noted immediately as a signal of unhideable stress. The behavioral analysis that Hawthorne built throughout the interview showed many unusual points, not looking directly at the photos when asked to confirm, frequently repeating the phrase, "I don't remember," especially when questions related to the collision time, constantly shifting to blaming someone else without providing any evidence. Unusually low level of emotional response when mentioning the deaths of the 3 children. Hawthorne noticed that each time technical data was presented, ECM selfie, water flow analysis, Amaris reacted more strongly to the information rather than the question content. This indicated that what she feared was not her own memories, but the undeniable data gradually tightening the circle of truth. As the interview stretched beyond 2 hours, Amaris began to show impatience. She said she wanted a lawyer, wanted to stop the exchange, wanted to end this ridiculous story. But right when standing up to gather her thing, a slip of the tongue made Hawthorne note it immediately. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know the car would skid like that." That statement, though Amaris immediately denied it and said she didn't remember what she said, became the key part in the behavioral analysis report. It showed the slip of the tongue common in people trying to conceal actions, but unconsciously admitting partial responsibility. When the interview ended, Hawthorne didn't need further confession. Based on ECM data, selfie photo reflection analysis, journey from Colorado, Corbin Hayes testimony, reckless driving history, and many signs of deception in the interview, he had sufficient basis to affirm that Amaris Vela not only was present in Wind River Canyon on the night of the tragedy, but also could not be innocent of the cause, leading to the deaths of Leah Terrell and the 3 children. The next step was no longer asking questions. The next step was preparing an arrest warrant. Immediately after the contradictory interview with Detective Sloan Hawthorne, Amaris Vela was detained for further investigation. This process meant every single phone call she made from the Denver County Jail was recorded, and those seemingly harmless recordings became a critical link, adding to the already overwhelming chain of evidence against her. If the interview revealed evasion and defensiveness, the jail calls exposed the real thoughts Amaris could no longer hide. The first batch of recordings, received by Wyoming DCI from the Denver County Jail, showed Amaris repeatedly calling her mother and a close friend. The conversations initially focused on frustration about being detained, but as they went on, less guarded statements started slipping out. In one call, Amaris whispered, "They found the car. I never should have left it there," a remark that made the audio analysis team replay it multiple times. Though not a direct confession, it implicitly confirmed that Amaris knew exactly how the Audi Q7 disappeared and why it had never been found. In another call, her voice tense. "If they don't have evidence, they can't convict me. I just have to stay quiet." That statement went straight into Hawthorne's report, because it clearly demonstrated intent to avoid responsibility, not the mindset of an innocent person trying to clear up a misunderstanding. This is the kind of language commonly heard from suspects who understand the gravity of their guilt and realize the evidence is closing in. The analysis team continued listening for hours. Several calls between Amaris and a man, most likely an old boyfriend, revealed even more. She spoke about regretting not going back to look for the phone, referring to the device lost the night of the incident and later forensically recovered via its memory card. This detail matched Corbin Hayes' statement that he never saw Amaris's phone the night she returned, meaning Amaris knew it was missing and understood how dangerous the data inside it could be. Another remark drew particular attention from investigators. "I didn't mean to kill anyone, but now everything's being pinned on me." That was the first time Amaris acknowledged the existence of victims, something she had completely avoided during her interview with Hawthorne. Although not a direct confession, in criminal law, statements showing awareness of deadly consequences are extremely significant when assessing a suspect's level of culpability. In yet another recording, Amaris asked her mother, "Don't you know anyone in Wyoming? Someone who could say something. They don't know everything that happened that night." The intent to interfere with the investigation, even if only verbally, was flagged as a red flag. In the same call, she admitted she panicked and left the scene immediately, which perfectly matched the timeline Corbin Hayes provided about Amaris's panicked state when she arrived in Denver. Scattered fragments from the jail calls also showed Amaris still trying to push the narrative that her car had been stolen, a story she kept repeating even though it had already been disproven. When her friend asked, "Did someone take your car and dump it in the river?" Amaris answered after several seconds of silence, "I can't talk about that night. If I do, everything falls apart." That silence between question and answer, what behavioral analysts call pauses of cognitive load, typically occurs when a speaker is weighing truth against lies. All of these calls were forwarded by Wyoming DCI to the Behavioral Analysis Unit and the prosecutor's office. The final report concluded that the jail calls contained three key elements: clear intent to evade responsibility, shown through requests to remain silent and desires not to reveal information; internal awareness of guilt, expressed through regret, fear of being caught, and the feeling that everything is being pinned on me; attempts to conceal and alter the narrative, including insisting the car was stolen, hoping someone would speak up for her, and anxiety about the lost phone. With the ECM data, recovered selfie, hydrology analysis, Corbin's testimony, and now the jail calls, case 10-2476 was no longer the evidence-scarce mystery it had once been. The entire picture had been almost completely assembled, enough for Wyoming DCI to take the next step, arresting Amaris Vila for charges related to the deaths of Leah Terrell and her 3 children. With all collected evidence, ECM black box, recovered selfie, hydrology analysis, Corbin Hayes' testimony, and the jail calls, Wyoming DCI officially completed the reconstruction of a case that had been stalled for. What began as a fragmented investigation had become a tightly linked chain of scientific data capable of recreating every second of the collision in Wind River Canyon. The 3 leading experts, Dr. Maren Silvers, ECM, Prof. Theo Brackenridge, hydrology, Leora Farnham, forensic 3D reconstruction, were tasked with presenting the findings in court. Dr. Silvers went first, having recovered the Audi Q7's ECM. She explained the 68 mph speed, 100% throttle, 0 braking, and neutral steering angle, a state of total loss of control consistent with complete driver distraction. The ECM data was replayed on large screens in the courtroom, showing speed graphs and vehicle response during the final 12. When the speed curve remained flat at maximum right until impact, many in the gallery visibly shuddered. No one could look at that graph and believe the driver had tried to avoid the crash. Next, Prof. Theo Brackenridge presented the hydrology simulation. By combining 2010 storm night water levels, wind and flow rates, he proved both Leah's sedan and Amaris's Audi could have been swept into the main channel of the Wind River, carried south, and lodged in deeper pools before being pushed down Bull Lake Creek. The location where the Audi was ultimately found matched Prof. Brackenridge's model exactly. Everything lined up so perfectly that it convinced even the most skeptical observers The river hadn't just removed evidence, it had hidden it for 14 years. Leora Farnham, the 3D crash reconstruction specialist, tied every piece of data into one unified model. Using ECM parameters, canyon topography, forensic injury patterns, and the hydrology model, she recreated the collision trajectory between the Audi Q7 and Leah's sedan. The simulation showed the Audi rear-ending Leah's car with enough force to eject all occupants the moment the sedan lost stability and left the roadway. The impact was displayed in the courtroom as a detailed 3D animation, showing exact vehicle positions, impact direction, and the slide path over the edge. When the simulation ended, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. There was no room left for doubt. No more the car was stolen. No more I don't remember that night. There was only one truth. Damaris Vila, speeding and on her phone, struck Leah Terrell's vehicle, causing the deaths of the mother and her 3 children, and the disappearance of baby Ash. Based on the totality of evidence and analysis, Wyoming DCI and the Fremont County Prosecutor's Office issued an arrest warrant for Damaris Vila on 3 counts of manslaughter, plus multiple reckless driving charges. Damaris was arrested in Denver and extradited to Wyoming for trial. At the 2024 Wyoming trial, faced with an unbreakable chain of technical evidence, especially the ECM, selfie, jail calls, and the detailed 3D crash animation, Damaris was forced to change her story. After several days of proceedings, she formally pleaded guilty to manslaughter to avoid the risk of a much longer sentence if convicted by a jury. Final sentence, 12 to 20 years imprisonment, depending on behavior and rehabilitation progress while incarcerated. When the judge read the verdict, Case 10-2476 was officially marked solved, closing one of the most mysterious cases Wyoming had ever seen, and opening the final chapter, the aftermath, the case left behind. Damaris Vila's sentence ended the 2024 Wyoming trial, but the ripples of the case did not stop inside the courtroom walls. The very next day, Wyoming DCI held a special press conference in Cheyenne to release the complete reconstruction of the 14-year-old case, a months-long effort that combined ECM data, hydrology modeling, photo reflection analysis, 3D simulation, and multiple never-before-used-together forensic techniques on a single cold case. During the presentation, DCI laid out the full sequence of events: the Audi Q7's journey into Wind River Canyon, the final moment selfie, the speed and loss of control recorded in the EC, the 3D rear impact simulation, the river current that carried both vehicles deep into Bull Lake Creek, and how the jail calls inadvertently revealed Damaris's consciousness of guilt. Media described the briefing as one of the most comprehensive forensic reports in Wyoming crash investigation history. For the first time, the public fully understood what happened on that blizzard-covered road in 2010. Something the people of Thermopolis and Riverton had waited 14 years to learn. In Thermopolis, where Leah's family had lived, the community reaction was emotional and stunned. For many, the case had become a permanent sad memory of a vehicle that vanished on a freezing night without a trace. Hearing that the mystery was solved by an Audi submerged deep in Bull Lake Creek brought relief, but also chills at the realization that the cause was not mere accident. It was the reckless actions of a stranger to Wyoming. In Riverton, where Leah and her children were headed that night, the local church held a small memorial. People who had joined the 2010 search parties said finally knowing the truth brought a late but genuine sense of closure to a wound that had never healed. Forensic and investigative professionals nationwide took notice as well. Trade journals called it a textbook example of using technical data to crack cold cases, proving that ECM modules can survive and be recovered after years underwater. Hydrology can track heavy objects in natural environments. 3D modeling can connect scattered facts into a seamless timeline, and even tiny details like reflections in a selfie can hold enormous investigative value. DCI, FBI, and NTSB training programs began incorporating the case as required study material, an illustration of the power of technical forensics in cases with no witnesses and no traditional crime scene. Ultimately, when the sentence was officially recorded and the forensic reports were widely shared among professionals, Wyoming DCI closed filed. The words "solved" closed were stamped on the cover, ending a journey of more than a decade through snow, water, rock, and hundreds of hours of data collection. For Leah Terrell's family, this conclusion could not erase their loss, but it at least gave them what they had waited years for: the truth, and the truth finally had a name. And for Wyoming, the Leah Terrell case became more than tragedy. It became a symbol of how science, persistence, and seemingly meaningless fragments of data can come together to break the silence of a cold case buried at the bottom of a river for nearly 4 years. In the context of modern American life, where driving, technology, and social media are woven into daily routine, the story of Leah Terrell is not just a 2010 Wyoming tragedy. It mirrors very real issues in today's United States. From Amaris Vela's driving behavior, taking a selfie at 68 Malafar in a blizzard, to her years-long history of speeding tickets, the story highlights the danger complacency on the road. Every year in the U.S., more than 3,000 people die in distraction-related crashes, and the image of Amaris, an influencer caught in the habit of drive and post, serves as a stark reminder that the smallest lapse in attention can cost innocent lives. The case also underscores the power of modern forensic science. Wyoming DCI's recovery of ECM data, selfie metadata analysis, hydrology, and 3D reconstruction show that in American society, time may hide crimes, but technology can still bring the truth to light. It emphasizes personal accountability in the age of data. Dangerous behavior can no longer be permanently buried in silence or excused by distorted memory. Finally, the biggest lesson is community solidarity and persistence in the pursuit of justice. The people of Thermopolis and Riverton waited 14 years, and that patience reflects a very American spirit. Justice may be late, but it must arrive. From this story, every American can take away one clear message. Responsibility behind the wheel is responsibility to other people's lives, and the truth, thanks to science and perseverance, will always be found. Thank you for following this chilling case to the end. If you found it valuable and want to hear more cases cracked by modern science, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next video, where we'll keep exploring files once thought lost to time but ultimately brought back into the light.